Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss a question that has become extremely popular among runners and wearable users. Can your watch actually tell you when to train hard? Today, devices such as Garmin, Polar, Apple Watch, Oura Ring, and Whoop constantly provide recovery scores, sleep analysis, HRV data, and readiness recommendations. But how accurate and useful are these metrics for real training decisions? Can wearables actually help us understand recovery and performance adaptation? Or are we sometimes trusting the technology too much? In this video, we are going to analyze a recent scientific study investigating sleep, nightly recovery, training load, and performance adaptations in runners using wrist-worn wearables. If you enjoy evidence-based endurance and sports science content, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and stay until the end of the video. This topic matters because wearable technology has exploded in popularity over the last few years. Many athletes now monitor sleep quality, HRV, recovery scores, and training readiness every single day. And in some cases, these metrics directly influence training decisions. But despite all this popularity, there is still debate about how useful wearable data really is for monitoring recovery and performance adaptation. Some people treat recovery scores almost like definitive answers. Others believe the technology is still too limited. That is exactly why studies like this are important. So what was the purpose of this study? The researchers wanted to investigate whether sleep and nightly recovery metrics collected by wrist-worn wearables were associated with training adaptations during intensified endurance training. In other words, could wearable recovery data help explain who adapts better to overload training? And could these devices help identify recovery status during demanding training periods? The study focused specifically on recreational runners. Now let's understand how the study was designed. The researchers evaluated 24 recreational runners. The protocol included 3 weeks of baseline training, 2 weeks of overload training, and 1 week of recovery. The athletes also performed 3,000-meter performance tests. Every day, wearable devices monitored sleep, heart rate variability, breathing rate, and recovery-related metrics. The goal was to observe how these physiological variables changed across different training phases. The findings were very interesting. Performance improved despite the overload phase. At the same time, perceived strain and muscle soreness increased substantially. But surprisingly, most sleep and recovery metrics did not systematically worsen across the group. This is important because many people expect wearable recovery scores to immediately collapse during overload training. But the human body is more complex than that. Recovery responses were not identical across all athletes. One of the most important findings involved individual variability. When researchers looked at group averages, many recovery metrics appeared relatively stable. But individual responses were highly variable. Some athletes showed clear changes in recovery markers. Others remained relatively stable despite overload. This suggests that recovery monitoring may work better at the individual level rather than relying only on generalized averages. And this is probably one of the biggest strengths of wearable monitoring, tracking personal trends over time. The study also found interesting associations involving HRV and autonomic recovery markers. Metrics such as ANS charge, sleep heart rate, and HRV changes were associated with performance adaptations. This suggests that autonomic nervous system responses may help reflect recovery status and adaptation to training load, but it is important to interpret this carefully. The study does not prove that HRV directly predicts performance. Instead, HRV may help provide useful information about physiological responses to training stress and recovery. So, what does this mean in practice? The findings suggest that wearable devices may help identify how different athletes respond to training load. This could potentially help coaches and athletes adjust overload periods, recovery strategies, and training progression. For example, some athletes may tolerate overload well, while others show stronger recovery disturbances. Wearables may help detect these patterns earlier. But the key idea is that wearable data should support decision-making, not fully control it. The study also highlights several important limitations. First, wearables are not perfect measurement tools. Second, sleep and recovery metrics did not consistently predict overload across all athletes. And third, consumer wearable algorithms are often proprietary and not fully transparent. This means we do not always know exactly how recovery scores are calculated, so wearable metrics should always be interpreted with caution and context. Another very important finding involved subjective recovery. During the overload phase, muscle soreness and perceived strain increased significantly. This reinforces a key principle in sports science. Athlete perception still matters enormously. Technology can provide useful objective information, But subjective sensations such as fatigue, soreness, motivation, mood, and readiness remain highly valuable. In practice, athlete monitoring works best when objective and subjective information are combined. So how should wearable data actually be used? The best approach is probably combining multiple sources of information. That includes training load, wearable metrics, subjective recovery, recovery questionnaires, and coaching judgment. The study strongly suggests avoiding blind reliance on readiness scores or single metrics. A recovery score alone should not automatically decide whether an athlete trains hard or rests. Instead, wearable data should be part of a broader decision-making process. To finish, let's summarize the main message of this study. Wearable devices may help identify individual recovery patterns and physiological responses to training load. Metrics such as HRV, sleep heart rate, and autonomic recovery may provide useful insights during overload training, but recovery monitoring is complex. No single metric perfectly predicts adaptation, fatigue, or performance, and wearable technology should not replace professional judgment, coaching experience, or athlete perception. The best monitoring systems probably combine objective data with subjective feedback and real-world training context. If this video was useful, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, turn on notifications, and share this video with runners, coaches, and endurance athletes. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.